Hey guys! Tonight we're going to embark on a rather unconventional journey. You're probably used to hearing about the roaring longships, the clashing axes, and the epic sagas of Viking warriors plundering distant shores. But what about when they weren't? You know, doing all that Viking stuff? What did a Viking actually do on a Tuesday afternoon? Tonight, we're going to peel back the layers of the fearsome warrior stereotype and sink into the quiet, often mundane, yet utterly fascinating rhythm of everyday Viking life. Imagine, if you will, the flickering firelight, the smell of wood smoke, and the gentle murmur of a community tucked away in a fjord. Miles from any raid, you'll be right there, experiencing the subtle textures of a life that was far more about farming, crafting, and community than about conquest. You might even find yourself drifting off as we explore the domestic side of these legendary people. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as always, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself standing, or perhaps more accurately, settling into a comfortable spot, within the heart of a structure that would have been the absolute center of a Viking family's existence, the longhouse. It's not quite the sprawling mansion you might imagine from historical dramas, but rather a long, low-slung building, typically constructed from wood, turf, or a combination of both. You can almost feel the cool, damp earth against your back as you lean against a sturdy timber post. The roof, often thatched with sod, would have been surprisingly effective at insulating against the biting Scandinavian winds. A feature you'd certainly appreciate on a long winter's night. There's a tangible sense of ancient, practical engineering here. Now, look around. The interior is generally dark, illuminated primarily by the central hearth, a large open fire pit running down the middle of the house. Smoke, well, it's a constant companion. There wouldn't have been a modern chimney as you know it. Instead, small vents in the roof, or simply the open doorway, would have served as rudimentary smoke exits. You can almost feel the slight sting in your eyes. A mild but persistent reminder of the air quality. Historians still argue whether the smoke was an intentional insect deterrent or just an accepted part of life. You'd probably get used to it. Or maybe you'd just spend a lot of time outside, blinking. Along the long walls, you see raised platforms or benches, often covered with animal hides for warmth and comfort. These served as both seating during the day and sleeping berths at night. Imagine several families, perhaps extended relatives, all sharing this single space. Privacy, as we understand it today, was a concept that probably didn't exist in the Viking lexicon. You'd be acutely aware of your neighbors, their snores, their whispered conversations, the clatter of their daily activities. It was a communal living arrangement born out of necessity and a strong sense of kinship. You can almost hear the soft rustle of hides as someone shifts in their sleep, or the gentle crackle of the fire as it settles. This was truly home's sweet longhouse. The floor beneath your feet is likely packed earth, perhaps covered with rushes or straw, which would need to be changed regularly. It's surprisingly warm near the hearth, a welcome relief from the chill that seeps in from the edges of the building. Scattered around, you'd spot various tools and implements, spindles for spinning wool, looms for weaving, perhaps a grinding stone for grain, and certainly cooking utensils. The longhouse wasn't just a place to sleep, it was a workshop, a kitchen, a social hub, and the undisputed heart of Viking domesticity. It was a multi-functional space, much like your living room, dining room, kitchen, and bedroom all rolled into one, except with significantly more sheepskin. One quirky tidbit about these longhouses is that some archaeological evidence suggests they occasionally housed livestock alongside humans, especially during the harshest winter months. Imagine sharing your living space with a cow or a few sheep. It sounds a bit rustic, but it provided additional warmth and protection for the animals, ensuring their survival. You might even hear the soft breathing of a cow, or the occasional bleat of a sheep, just beyond a partition, adding to the symphony of domestic sounds. It's a far cry from your quiet suburban home, isn't it? As the first faint light of dawn begins to filter through the smoke vents and the cracks in the longhouse walls, you're aware that the day's work is already beginning. There's no hitting the snooze button in a Viking longhouse. I'm afraid the rhythms of life were dictated by the sun, the seasons, and the pressing needs of survival. You hear the gentle stirring of bodies on their sleeping platforms, the soft crackle as someone rekindles the embers in the central hearth. This is a day without raiding, without the thrill of battle, a day focused entirely on the practicalities of existence. Your first task, or at least one of the first you'd witness, might involve tending to the animals. If they were housed inside during the winter, they'd need to be let out to pasture, or at least moved to a separate enclosure. You can almost smell the earthy scent of the livestock, a comforting aroma that signified wealth and sustenance. If it's a warmer season, perhaps you're out with the family, herding sheep or goats to fresh grazing lands. It's a quiet, rhythmic task, one that requires patience and a good eye, especially on the rugged Scandinavian terrain. No time for fancy gadgets or remote controls here, just you, the animals, and the open air. Next, attention often turns to food. Breakfast wasn't the leisurely affair we often enjoy today. It was more about sustenance, a practical start to a long day. You might be helping to prepare a simple porridge, perhaps made from oats or barley, cooked over the open fire. The smell of grains simmering, mingled with the lingering wood smoke, fills the air, or perhaps it's dried meat or fish, providing essential protein for the demanding physical labor ahead. You'd likely be using basic utensils, a wooden spoon, a simple pot, a testament to the ingenuity of using what was readily available. This isn't gourmet dining, but it's hearty and effective. Throughout the day, the longhouse hums with activity. The women would be deeply involved in tasks related to textile production. You might see someone spinning wool into yarn, the rhythmic hum of the spindle a constant background noise. Then, there's the weaving. Imagine the large, upright loom, the careful threading of warp and weft, slowly transforming yarn into cloth. This wasn't just a hobby, it was essential for creating clothing, blankets, and sails for those very longships we hear so much about. It was a painstaking process, requiring skill and endless patience. One quirky tidbit: the quality of a woman's weaving was often a mark of her standing and skill within the community. So, no pressure, but your thread count really mattered. Meanwhile, the men would be engaged in their own set of vital activities. This could involve woodworking, shaping timber for repairs to the longhouse or for constructing new tools. You might hear the steady thud of an axe against wood, or the scrape of a knife as a piece of lumber is carved. There's also the constant need for maintenance around the farm, repairing fences, mending tools, or tending to the field preparation. Historians still argue whether specific tasks were strictly gender segregated or if there was more fluidity based on necessity and skill. However, the general division of labor was clear, ensuring the household and farm ran smoothly. You'd probably find yourself covered in wood shavings, dirt, or sheep wool by the end of the day, a tangible sign of a productive day's work. As the sun begins to set, the community would start to gather back in the longhouse. The aroma of a simmering stew might begin to waft through the air. Perhaps a mixture of root vegetables, meat, and wild herbs. This shared evening meal was often the most substantial of the day. A time for the family to reconvene, share stories, and relax after the day's exertions. You can almost feel the warmth radiating from the central hearth, a beacon in the gathering dusk, drawing everyone closer. It's a simple life, yes, but one filled with purpose and the quiet satisfaction of self-sufficiency. You won't find a remote control here, just the flickering flames and the soft murmur of conversation. As the sun climbs higher, you find yourself stepping out of the longhouse and into the crisp, often bracing air of the Viking landscape, ready to engage with the very foundation of their survival, farming. This wasn't just a quaint pastime, it was the backbone of their economy. The very reason they could live and thrive in these sometimes harsh environments. You walk across fields that might seem small and fragmented by modern standards, carved out of forests or nestled into valleys alongside winding fjords. The mainstays of Viking agriculture were remarkably resilient grains. You'd see fields of barley, used extensively for porridge, bread, and, of course, brewing ale, a staple beverage that provided calories and a bit of a psychological lift. There would also be oats and rye, each suited to different soil types and climates, ensuring a diverse and relatively stable food supply. You might even spot small patches of flax, grown not for food, but for its fibers, which were essential for making linen cloth. Imagine the collective effort involved in tilling these fields, often with very basic implements like wooden plows pulled by oxen, or even by hand in smaller plots. It's a far cry from the massive, automated machinery of today, isn't it? Your back would certainly feel it by the end of the day. Beyond grains, the Vikings cultivated a variety of vegetables. You might be knee-deep in a patch of cabbage, a hardy plant that could withstand the colder temperatures. Onions, leeks, and various root vegetables like carrots and parsnips, though perhaps not the vibrant orange carrots we know today, would also be grown. These weren't just for flavor, they were vital sources of vitamins and minerals, crucial for maintaining health when fresh food was seasonal. You can almost feel the damp earth clinging to your hands as you carefully tend to these plants, hoping for a bountiful harvest. Of course, farming wasn't just about plants, it was deeply intertwined with animal husbandry. You'd see cattle, smaller than modern breeds, but providing milk, meat, and hinds. Sheep were ubiquitous, prized for their wool, which was indispensable for clothing and warmth, as well as for meat, and goats, with their ability to graze on rougher terrain, were also valuable for milk and meat. Imagine the symphony of bleating sheep, mooing cows, and perhaps the occasional grunting pig. It's a vibrant, living landscape, teeming with the sounds of sustenance. Historians still argue whether specific breeds of livestock were unique to different Viking regions or if there was a broader exchange of animals across their settlements. One quirky tidbit: some Viking sagas even mention specific, prized animals, highlighting their importance in the community, like a favorite cow named Daisy. Perhaps, but with a much more formidable Norse name. During the growing season, a significant portion of the community's time and effort would be dedicated to farming. Planting in spring, weeding in summer, and the intense, communal effort of harvesting in autumn. The success or failure of these harvests could literally mean the difference between life and death during the long, dark winters. You'd feel the urgency in the air as the harvest season approached. Everyone working together, knowing that their collective survival depended on bringing in every last sheaf of grain and every last root vegetable. This communal labor fostered a strong sense of interdependence and shared purpose. A bond forged in the fields as much as in the longhouse. Having spent some time in the fields, you now drift back towards the hum of activity closer to the longhouse, where the sounds of crafting and creation fill the air. The Vikings, often stereotyped as purely warriors, were in fact incredibly skilled artisans and craftsmen. Their survival depended not just on farming, but on their ability to create nearly everything they needed from raw materials found in their environment. You might first notice the distinct smell of wood smoke mingled with something else, perhaps the scent of hot metal. Blacksmithing was a critical skill, performed by a select few in the community. Imagine the rhythmic clink-clank of hammer on anvil, the glow of the forge casting dancing shadows. Iron was painstakingly extracted from bog ore, then shaped into tools essential for daily life. Axes for felling trees, hammers for construction, knives for everything from preparing food to self-defense, and even farming implements. It was a dangerous but vital profession, requiring immense strength and precision. One quirky tidbit: Viking smiths sometimes incorporated designs into their tools, not just for aesthetics, but as a form of signature or even a magical ward. You might see a tool with a subtle, almost hidden knotwork pattern. Then, your attention turns to the quieter, yet equally important, crafts. Woodworking was ubiquitous. You'd see skilled hands shaping everything from sturdy planks for house repairs to intricate bowls, spoons, and even small, ornate carvings. The Vikings had a deep understanding of different wood types, choosing oak for strength, pine for lightness, and birch for its flexibility. The scent of freshly cut wood, sometimes mingled with the tang of pine resin, would be a constant presence. Think about the sheer number of wooden items you use daily. The Vikings had to craft all of them by hand. Nearby, the rhythmic thud of a loom signifies textile production. As we briefly touched upon, this was primarily the domain of women, and it was an art form as much as a necessity. From the raw wool shorn from sheep, it was spun into yarn, then meticulously dyed using natural pigments from plants and minerals, producing earthy reds, blues, and browns. Then came the weaving, transforming these threads into robust cloth for tunics, trousers, cloaks, and even the sails for their famous longships. The complexity of some surviving Viking textiles suggests a level of artistry that goes far beyond mere functionality. You can almost feel the rough texture of the wool, soon to be transformed into something warm and practical. Beyond these major crafts, you'd observe other vital skills. Leatherworking was essential for creating shoes, belts, pouches, and parts of tools. The scent of tanned hide might reach you. A strong, earthy aroma. Bone and antler carving provided material for combs, needles, game pieces, and decorative items. Even the creation of pottery for storage and cooking, though often simple, required knowledge of local clays and firing techniques. Historians still argue whether the level of specialization in these crafts was consistent across all Viking settlements or if smaller communities relied more on generalists. But one thing is clear: nearly everyone contributed to the production of goods necessary for survival. It's a reminder that in this era, your hands were your most valuable tools, and your ingenuity, your greatest asset. No Amazon Prime deliveries here. If you needed it, you probably made it. From the clang of the blacksmith and the soft hum of the loom, your attention shifts to the very heart of Viking society, the Viking family values. This wasn't just a collection of individuals living under one roof, it was a tightly knit unit. An economic and social bedrock where roles were defined, and interdependence was paramount. You can almost feel the gentle weight of tradition and expectation in the air. Within the longhouse, the patriarch, typically the eldest male, held significant authority. His decisions, particularly concerning the farm, trade, and legal matters, were usually final. However, this wasn't an absolute monarchy. The matriarch, his wife, wielded considerable power within the domestic sphere. She managed the household, supervised the preparation and storage of food, oversaw the production of textiles, and often held the keys to the family's wealth. You can almost see her, moving with quiet authority, ensuring everything runs smoothly. One quirky tidbit: archaeological finds, particularly grave goods, suggest that many Viking women were buried with their keys, symbolizing their significant control over the household economy. So, while the men might have been out raiding, the women were holding down the fort, literally, with the keys to the pantry and the chest. Gender roles, while generally distinct, were also practical and flexible. Men were primarily responsible for farming the fields, hunting, fishing, trade, and, of course, warfare when it arose. Women managed the longhouse, processed food, spun and wove textiles, and raised the children. However, necessity often blurred these lines. If a man was away, his wife might take on traditionally male tasks, managing the farm, or even participating in local assemblies. Historians still argue whether the roles were as rigidly defined in practice as sagas sometimes portray. But the fundamental partnership between husband and wife was undeniable. You sense a deep mutual respect, born from shared hardship and mutual reliance. And then there were the children. Viking childhood wasn't a prolonged period of carefree play as we often imagine it today. From a young age, children were integrated into the daily routines of the longhouse and the farm. Boys would learn husbandry, woodworking, and the use of weapons from their fathers and elder male relatives. Girls would be instructed in spinning, weaving, cooking, and childcare by their mothers and older female relatives. You might see a small child, perhaps no older than 5 or 6, mimicking an adult, diligently helping with a small chore. It was a practical apprenticeship, preparing them for the realities of adult life and their future roles within the community. Play, when it happened, was often learning disguised as fun, like practicing with toy bows or mimicking domestic tasks. The family extended beyond the immediate parents and children. Grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins might all share the same longhouse, forming an extended household. This communal living provided a strong support network, especially in times of hardship or illness. You can almost feel the collective warmth, the interwoven lives, the constant hum of interaction. It was a cradle-to-grave support system, where the wisdom of the elders was valued, and the energy of the young was put to good use. There were no designated youth groups or senior centers. Here, everyone had their place and their contribution to the family's well-being. It was a life lived in close quarters, demanding cooperation and mutual support, a true testament to the strength of family bonds in a challenging world. From the quiet hum of family life, your senses are now drawn to the enticing aromas emanating from the central hearth. It's time to consider feasting and festivities. While Viking life was undeniably tough, it wasn't all grim endurance. Social gatherings, meals, and celebrations were vital for community cohesion, morale, and simply enjoying the fruits of their labor. You can almost feel the anticipation building as the day's work winds down. What did a Viking feast look like? Forget delicate cutlery and individual plates. The focus was on hearty, communal eating. Meat was a luxury, but when available, it would be roasted or boiled. You might smell the rich, savory scent of pork or beef cooking slowly over the open flames. Perhaps even wild game like venison if a successful hunt had occurred. Alongside the meat, you'd find a variety of stews and porridges, often made with grains and root vegetables. Imagine thick, nourishing concoctions, bubbling in large cauldrons suspended over the fire. Fish, of course, was a much more common protein source, especially in coastal or lakeside settlements. Dried and salted fish would be a year-round staple, but fresh fish would also be consumed when available. You might even catch a whiff of a fish stew, perhaps with wild herbs gathered from the nearby forests. Bread, usually a flat bread made from barley or rye flour, would accompany every meal, used to scoop up the food. Think of it as an edible utensil. Historians still argue whether the Viking diet was primarily meat-based or if grains and vegetables formed the bulk of their sustenance. But it certainly varied by region and season. One quirky tidbit: some evidence suggests Vikings might have used small knives for eating, but fingers were the primary tools, making cleanliness a rather flexible concept. And what about drinks? Water was, of course, essential, but the most common alcoholic beverage was ale. Brewed from barley, it was a nourishing, low-alcohol drink consumed by everyone, including children, though likely in much smaller quantities. Imagine the earthy, slightly sweet aroma of freshly brewed ale, perhaps with a hint of honey if it was a special batch. For more important celebrations, mead, a fermented honey wine, would be served. Mead was a potent, prized drink, symbolizing wealth and status. You can almost taste the rich, honeyed sweetness as you imagine a horn of mead being passed around. These meals, especially larger ones, were not just about sustenance, they were social events. People would gather around the central hearth, sharing stories, news, and laughter. The longhouse would be filled with the chatter of voices, perhaps the strumming of a lyre or the singing of a saga. These were moments of respite, of community bonding, where the hardships of daily life were momentarily forgotten. The Vikings knew how to celebrate, and these feasts were a vital part of their social fabric, reinforcing alliances and easing tensions. You might hear the booming laughter of a skald or poet as they recount a particularly humorous tale, making everyone forget their troubles for a moment. It's a reminder that even in a challenging world, humans find ways to connect and celebrate. As the sounds of the evening feast begin to mellow, your mind turns to another crucial aspect of Viking society, one that often gets overshadowed by the tales of raiding, law and order, kind of. Despite popular images of wild, lawless barbarians, Viking communities had surprisingly sophisticated, albeit unwritten, systems for managing disputes and maintaining social harmony. It wasn't a police state with jails and courts as you know them, but rather a system built on reputation, community pressure, and the principle of compensation. You can almost feel the quiet weight of community expectation in the air. The cornerstone of Viking law was the Thing, a public assembly where free men, and sometimes women, in certain contexts, gathered to discuss and resolve legal matters, make decisions for the community, and elect leaders. Imagine stepping into an open clearing, perhaps a designated mound or a circle of stones, where the entire community would gather. It's a far cry from a sterile courtroom. Here, disputes would be aired, evidence presented, and a consensus sought. It was a form of direct democracy, albeit one limited to free individuals. Disputes often revolved around property, inheritance, or acts of violence. If a conflict arose, say, over a stolen axe or a boundary dispute, the wronged party would bring their case to the Thing. There, both sides would present their arguments, often supported by character witnesses, people who could vouch for their integrity or the truthfulness of their claims. This wasn't about legal technicalities, it was about reputation and community standing. You can almost hear the earnest voices, the murmurs of agreement or disagreement from the assembled crowd. One quirky tidbit: some sources suggest that certain insults, if deemed severe enough, could also be brought before the Thing, showing the importance of honor and verbal reputation. The aim of the legal process was rarely punishment in the modern sense of imprisonment. Instead, it was about compensation and reconciliation. If someone was found to be in the wrong, they would typically be required to pay a fine, known as wergild in cases of homicide, to the injured party or their family. This system aimed to prevent blood feuds from escalating, providing a structured way for aggrieved parties to receive redress. Historians still argue whether the Thing's decisions were always enforced consistently across all Viking settlements or if local powerful individuals sometimes swayed outcomes. However, the ideal was clearly justice through agreement. If an individual refused to abide by the Thing's decision, the ultimate sanction was outlawry. This meant they were declared an outlaw, stripped of their legal rights and protection. Anyone could then kill them without repercussion, and they were essentially banished from society. It was a terrifying prospect, worse than death for many, as it meant complete isolation and vulnerability. You can almost feel the chill of that societal ostracization, a stark reminder of the power of community in a world without formal policing. This informal yet effective system relied heavily on personal honor, the threat of social exclusion, and the collective memory of the community. There were no written laws in the modern sense. Legal traditions were passed down orally, through generations, relying on the collective wisdom and judgment of the thing. It was a robust system for its time, designed not just to punish, but to restore balance and prevent the endless cycles of revenge. You might even find yourself nodding along, realizing the cleverness of a system that leveraged social pressure as its primary enforcement mechanism. As the quiet hum of the thing fades into the background, a different kind of quiet fills the longhouse, one imbued with a sense of the mystical. You're now stepping into the heart of the spiritual side of life for the Vikings. A world far removed from organized religion as we know it, yet deeply woven into every fiber of their daily existence. It's a realm where the seen and unseen coexisted, where gods and spirits influenced harvests, journeys, and even the simplest household chores. At the core of Viking spirituality was a rich pantheon of gods and goddesses, with familiar names like Odin, the All-Father, god of wisdom, poetry, and war; Thor, the mighty wielder of Mjolnir, protector of humanity and god of thunder; and Freya, goddess of love, fertility, and battle. These deities weren't distant, ethereal beings. They were active participants in the world, influencing everything from the weather to personal destiny. You can almost feel the presence of these powerful forces, shaping the very air around you. Prayers and offerings weren't necessarily formal rituals in a temple, but often personal appeals made at sacred groves, standing stones, or even just by the hearth. But beyond the grand gods, the Viking world was teeming with lesser spirits and beings. You might hear hushed tales of Landvader, guardian spirits of the land, who needed to be appeased to ensure good fortune for the farm. There were also Alfur, elves, and Divergar, dwarves, often associated with specific places or crafts, whose goodwill could bring prosperity or whose displeasure could bring misfortune. Imagine leaving a small bowl of milk out for a household spirit. A tiny, almost unconscious act of respect that permeated daily life. One quirky tidbit: some Viking ships even had carved figureheads, often dragons or serpent heads, which were believed to ward off hostile land spirits when approaching foreign shores, only to be removed when nearing their own land to avoid scaring their own benevolent spirits. It was a delicate balance. This spiritual etiquette, fate, or WYRD, was a powerful concept, while the gods certainly held sway. The idea that a person's destiny was largely predetermined was deeply ingrained. This wasn't a fatalistic resignation, however, but often spurred individuals to act bravely and to live honorably, as their actions contributed to their lasting fame and legacy, which was a form of immortality. Historians still argue whether the concept of fate in Viking belief truly negated free will, or if it was more about accepting the inevitable while striving for a glorious end. You sense a quiet acceptance of the unpredictable nature of existence, a pragmatic approach to the divine. While there weren't churches in the modern sense, sacred spaces were vital. These could be natural features like groves, springs, or particularly shaped rocks, or man-made structures like small cult houses or simply the central hearth within the longhouse. Blots, or sacrifices, were communal rituals, often involving animals, performed to honor the gods and secure their favor. These weren't necessarily gruesome affairs, but deeply meaningful acts of communion and reciprocity. The blood might be sprinkled on altars or participants, signifying a sacred bond. You can almost feel the profound connection to the natural world that underpinned their spirituality. The changing seasons, the power of the sea, the fertility of the land, all were direct manifestations of divine will and the presence of spirits. It was a spirituality deeply embedded in the practicalities of their existence, guiding their decisions, comforting them in times of hardship, and giving meaning to a world that was often both beautiful and brutal. It was a constant, gentle hum beneath the surface of their daily lives, a reminder that they were never truly alone, always watched over by forces both seen and unseen. As the spiritual murmurs gentle your mind, you're now drawn into a realm of communal entertainment and shared history, the power of the saga. Before the advent of written texts for the masses, the spoken word was paramount, and the Vikings, like many ancient cultures, had a deep and abiding love for storytelling. Imagine the crackle of the fire, the flickering shadows on the longhouse walls, and the expectant faces gathered around as a skilled storyteller begins their tale. These weren't just bedtime stories for children. Sagas were epic narratives, often recounting the deeds of heroes, the lineage of powerful families, historical events, and even humorous anecdotes. They served as history lessons, moral guides, and thrilling entertainment all rolled into one. You can almost hear the cadence of the storyteller's voice, rising and falling with the drama of the narrative, painting vivid pictures with words alone. Perhaps the tale is of a daring sea voyage, a fierce battle, or a clever legal dispute, each saga connecting the listeners to their past and their cultural identity. The skalds, or court poets, were particularly revered. These individuals weren't just reciters, they were composers of intricate verse, often incorporating complex metaphors and alliterations. They were the rock stars of their day, capable of captivating an audience with their linguistic prowess and memory. Imagine the sheer mental feat of memorizing hundreds, if not thousands, of lines of poetry, perfectly reciting them for hours on end. It's truly astonishing. One quirky tidbit: some skalds were so skilled that they could compose verses extemporaneously, on the spot, a true testament to their mastery of language and poetic form. This wasn't just a party trick, it was a demonstration of profound intellectual ability. Sagas were instrumental in preserving history and genealogy. In a society without extensive written records, these oral traditions ensured that important events, the accomplishments of ancestors, and the complex relationships between clans were remembered and passed down through generations. You understand now why knowing your lineage was so important. Your story was inextricably linked to the stories of those who came before you, carefully preserved in the collective memory of the community. Historians still argue whether the sagas, as written down centuries later, accurately reflect the original oral traditions or if they were embellished and altered over time. Regardless, They offer an invaluable window into the Viking worldview. The storytelling wasn't always a formal affair with a dedicated skald. Around the evening hearth, families would share simpler tales, local legends, personal anecdotes, or perhaps a slightly exaggerated account of a successful hunt. These everyday stories reinforced community bonds, taught lessons to the younger generation, and simply provided a way to pass the long, dark evenings. You can almost feel the warmth of the fire, the comfort of shared laughter, as a parent recounts a tale to their children, helping them understand their place in the world. So, while the image of a Viking warrior is often front and center, don't forget the profound power of their words. The sagas, whether epic or intimate, were the threads that wove together their past, present, and future, giving meaning and coherence to a life lived on the edge. They were the very fabric of their cultural memory, a soothing balm for the soul in a world that could be relentlessly harsh. You might even find yourself drifting off as the echo of ancient voices tells tales from a time long past. From the enthralling echoes of sagas, your mental journey now shifts to a perhaps less dramatic, yet equally vital, aspect of Viking life: trade. Not just raids. While the image of the marauding Viking is deeply ingrained, a significant portion of their existence, and indeed their prosperity, came from peaceful exchange. You can almost feel the gentle ebb and flow of commerce, a far cry from the crashing waves of battle. The Vikings were, first and foremost, exceptional seafarers and navigators. Their longships, while formidable in warfare, were also incredibly efficient cargo vessels. They weren't just used for plundering, they were vital for connecting distant lands and facilitating the exchange of goods. Imagine a longship, laden not with captives or loot, but with bales of wool, barrels of fish, and stacks of furs, sailing peacefully into a foreign port. It's a different kind of power, isn't it? The trade routes stretched remarkably far. From the frosty reaches of the Arctic to the sun-drenched markets of Byzantium and the Islamic caliphates. Vikings established trading outposts and settlements across Russia, Eastern Europe, and even into North America. They were truly global entrepreneurs of their time. You might picture a bustling marketplace, a vibrant tapestry of different languages and cultures, where the clink of foreign coins mingled with the bartering of goods. What did the Vikings trade? Their primary exports were products of their natural environment and their craftsmanship. Furs, particularly those of beaver, sable, and ermine, were highly prized in warmer climes. Walrus ivory, with its beautiful texture, was fashioned into ornate carvings and luxury items. Amber, found along the Baltic coasts, was another sought-after commodity, valued for jewelry and decorative purposes. From their farms, they traded hides, wool, and fish, both fresh and dried. You can almost smell the distinct aroma of cured fish, a scent that signified valuable goods. In return for their goods, the Vikings brought back items that weren't readily available in Scandinavia. They imported silver, often in the form of coins or raw ingots, which became a primary form of wealth and exchange. Silk from Byzantium, spices from the east, wine from Francia, and glassware from the Rhineland were luxurious imports, signifying status and connecting them to a wider world. Imagine handling a piece of shimmering silk, something exotic and rare in the otherwise practical Viking world. One quirky tidbit: sometimes, the Vikings would simply melt down foreign silver coins to make their own jewelry or ingots. Valuing the precious metal more than the currency it represented, historians still argue whether the initial expansion of the Vikings was driven more by a desire for trade in new lands, or purely by a thirst for plunder. It's likely a complex mix of both, with opportunities for raiding often leading to the discovery of new trade possibilities. But what is undeniable is that peaceful trade was a consistent and significant part of their economic life, providing stability and prosperity in the long term. Far beyond the episodic gains of warfare, you sense a quiet understanding that a reliable trading partner could be just as valuable, if not more so, than a vanquished foe. It was a sophisticated network of commerce that allowed them to thrive and expand their influence, not just through the sword, but through the merchant scales. Having explored the bustling world of Viking trade, let's now turn our attention to something much more personal, something that touched every Viking regardless of their status: dress to impress or survive. Viking clothing wasn't just about fashion, it was a testament to their practicality, their resourcefulness, and their adaptation to the often harsh Scandinavian climate. You can almost feel the texture of the rough-spun wool, the chill of the morning air, and the warmth of a well-made garment. The foundation of Viking attire was almost universally wool. This incredible natural fiber, harvested from their ubiquitous sheep, was spun into yarn and woven into durable cloth. It was warm, breathable, and even retained some insulating properties when wet, a crucial feature in a maritime climate. You'd likely be wearing layers. Directly against your skin, you might have a simple linen tunic, offering a softer feel. Over that, a woolen tunic, perhaps knee-length for men and ankle-length for women. The colors would generally be earthy, browns, grays, and undyed creams, though dyes from plants and minerals could introduce reds, blues, and yellows for those who could afford it. Imagine the subtle variations in hue, reflecting the natural world around them. For men, trousers were essential. These could range from loose-fitting breeches gathered at the ankle to more tailored versions, sometimes even baggy and tucked into leg wraps or boots. Imagine the practicality of trousers for farming, sailing, or simply walking through snow. Over their tunics, both men and women would wear cloaks or shawls, fastened with a simple brooch at the shoulder. These weren't just fashion accessories, they were vital for warmth and protection from the elements. Easily shed when working or added when the chill set in, you can almost feel the weight of a heavy wool cloak, shielding you from a sudden gust of wind. Women's clothing often involved a long underdress, perhaps of linen, topped with a hangerrock or apron dress. This was essentially a sleeveless tunic, often suspended by straps over the shoulders, which were typically fastened with prominent oval brooches. These brooches weren't just decorative, they were functional, holding the garment in place, and often served as a display of wealth or status. You might see a pair of these elegant, boat-shaped brooches, perhaps made of bronze or even silver, gleaming softly in the dim light. One quirky tidbit: sometimes, small tools or even keys would be suspended from chains attached to these brooches, making them a practical fashion statement. Footwear consisted of leather shoes or boots, often simple in design, tied or buckled to fit snugly. These were essential for protecting the feet from rough terrain and cold. Head coverings were also common. From simple woolen caps for men to scarves or intricately braided hairstyles for women. Sometimes covered by a veil or hood. Historians still argue whether the elaborate hairstyles depicted in some artwork were common everyday wear or reserved for special occasions. But what's clear is that practical protection from the elements was paramount. Even in their functional attire, there was room for personal expression. Brooches, beads, arm rings, and pendants, often made from bronze, silver, or sometimes gold, were common adornments. These items could signify wealth, marital status, or religious belief. So, while you wouldn't see haute couture or fast fashion, you'd witness a timeless approach to dressing, robust, layered, and perfectly suited to the demands of their world. With touches of understated elegance. It was clothing built to last, to protect, and quietly, perhaps, to impress. Stepping away from the practical aesthetics of Viking clothing, your journey through their daily life now leads you to a more somber, yet equally vital, aspect: health and healing. In an era before modern medicine, Viking survival depended on a deep understanding of natural remedies, basic surgical skills, and a healthy dose of stoicism. You can almost feel the chill of a wound, the warmth of an herbal poultice, and the quiet resignation to fate. Life was undeniably hard, and injuries were common. A misstep while farming, a mishap with a tool, or even a fall from a horse could lead to broken bones, cuts, or infections. When these occurred, there were no emergency rooms or sterile operating theaters. Healing often fell to specific individuals within the community, usually older women, known for their knowledge of herbs, or, in more serious cases, skilled individuals who might have also been warriors, possessing practical experience with wounds. Imagine the quiet intensity of such a scene: a simple hut, perhaps, or a corner of the longhouse, dimly lit, as a wound is cleaned with water and perhaps packed with moss or certain plant materials known for their antiseptic properties. The Vikings made extensive use of herbal medicine. You'd likely encounter remedies derived from readily available plants. Willow bark for pain relief, a natural source of salicylic acid. The precursor to aspirin, yarrow to staunch bleeding, and various poultices made from crushed leaves and roots to reduce swelling or draw out infection. Imagine the subtle, earthy aroma of these concoctions, brewed into teas or applied directly to the skin. One quirky tidbit: some archaeological finds suggest that Vikings might have used fungi, like the tinder fungus, not just for fire starting, but also for its hemostatic properties to stop bleeding. It's a reminder of their ingenuity in utilizing every resource available in their environment. For more severe injuries, basic surgery was performed. This might include setting broken bones, stitching wounds, or even, in extreme cases, trepanning, drilling a hole in the skull, to relieve pressure from head injuries. These procedures would have been incredibly painful, performed without anesthesia as we know it, though perhaps with some form of herbal sedative. The success rate would have varied wildly, relying heavily on the skill of the practitioner and the patient's own resilience. Historians still argue whether some of these surgical practices were rudimentary or if they had a surprisingly advanced understanding of anatomy for their time. based on skeletal evidence showing successful bone mending. Hygiene, while not understood in terms of germ theory, was also surprisingly valued. Regular bathing, often in natural hot springs or heated bathhouses, was common. This wasn't just for cleanliness, it was also a social ritual and a way to relax tired muscles. You can almost feel the cleansing steam, the warmth against your skin after a long day of labor. Cleanliness, combined with their knowledge of herbal remedies, likely helped prevent some infections, though mortality rates from illness and injury remained high. Ultimately, accepting the fragility of life and the inevitability of illness was part of the Viking mindset. They possessed a remarkable resilience and a practical approach to ailments, relying on traditional knowledge and community support to navigate the challenges of health in an unforgiving world. You sense a quiet courage in their acceptance of what could not be cured, and their determination to make the best of what they had. Having observed the quiet bravery required for Viking health, your awareness now shifts to how the next generation was prepared for such a challenging world. We're now delving into education and learning in Viking society, a process that was less about textbooks and more about practical skills. Oral tradition and apprenticeship. You can almost feel the gentle guidance of an elder, the focused concentration of a learner, and the inherent wisdom passed down through generations. Formal schools, as you understand them today, simply didn't exist. Instead, education was intrinsically woven into the fabric of daily life. Children learned by doing, by observing, and by participating in the activities of the longhouse and the farm from a very young age. This wasn't just theoretical knowledge, it was hands-on, practical, and immediately applicable to their survival and the well-being of the family. Imagine a young boy watching his father sharpen an axe, then being handed a smaller, duller version to practice with, or a young girl mimicking her mother's movements at the spinning wheel. For boys, learning involved mastery of the physical world. This meant farming techniques, understanding the seasons, animal husbandry, and basic carpentry. They would learn how to handle tools safely and effectively, how to mend a fence, how to navigate by the stars, and how to fish. Crucially, they would also learn about weapons handling. Even if a boy didn't become a full-time warrior, basic proficiency with a spear or an axe was essential for self-defense and hunting. You might hear the distant thwack of an arrow hitting a target, or the grunts of boys wrestling in mock combat, learning strength and agility. Girls, on the other hand, received a comprehensive education in managing the domestic sphere. This included cooking and food preservation, a vital skill for surviving the long winters. They learned about textile production from raw wool to finished garment, a complex process that required skill in spinning, dyeing, and weaving. They would also be taught about basic healing, the properties of herbs, and, most importantly, the care and nurturing of younger children. One quirky tidbit: some evidence suggests that certain runes, while primarily used for inscriptions, might have also been taught as a basic form of literacy for practical purposes like marking ownership or simple messages, particularly for those involved in trade. Beyond practical skills, a significant part of Viking education was the oral tradition. Children grew up listening to sagas, poems, and family histories. This instilled in them a deep understanding of their culture, their ancestors, their moral code, and their place within the community. It taught them about honor, courage, loyalty, and the consequences of actions. You can almost hear the rhythmic storytelling, absorbing lessons without even realizing it. As a child listens to an elder by the firelight, historians still argue whether the level of literacy with runes was more widespread than previously thought, or if it remained largely the domain of a few specialized individuals. This form of education fostered resilience, self-reliance, and a strong sense of community. Every individual had a role, and learning those roles from childhood ensured the smooth functioning of their society. It was a continuous process, from infancy through adulthood, adapting as needed to the demands of a life lived close to nature and the necessities of survival. There were no grades or report cards, just the undeniable proof of skills mastered and a productive contribution to the family's well-being. From the essential lessons of Viking education, we now turn to the lighter, yet equally important, moments of Viking life, leisure and games. It wasn't all hard labor and serious pursuits. Even in a demanding world, Vikings found time for relaxation, entertainment, and social bonding, often through activities that reinforced their skills and camaraderie. You can almost hear the low murmur of voices, the clatter of gaming pieces, and the ripple of laughter. One of the most popular forms of indoor entertainment would have been board games. Evidence suggests that games like Nefatafel, sometimes called Viking chess, were widely played. Imagine the strategic thinking involved, the quiet concentration as pieces are moved across a carved wooden board. This wasn't just idle amusement, it honed tactical skills, patience, and foresight, qualities valuable in both battle and daily life. You might see two individuals intensely focused on their game, surrounded by a small audience offering quiet commentary. One quirky tidbit: some Nefatafel sets have been found buried with individuals, suggesting their personal importance, much like a favorite board game for you today. Outdoor activities were often more physically demanding. Wrestling, glima, was a popular pastime, not just for sport but as a way to maintain physical prowess and strength. You can almost feel the strain of muscles, the quick movements, as two individuals engage in a friendly, yet competitive, bout. Archery and spear throwing were also common, doubling as both leisure and essential training for hunting and warfare. Imagine the satisfying thud of an arrow hitting its mark, or the graceful arc of a thrown spear. These activities weren't just fun, they were vital for survival and defense. Social gatherings around the hearth, as we discussed, were also a form of leisure. Storytelling was paramount, whether it was the epic sagas recited by a skald or simpler tales shared among family and friends. But there was also music. While direct evidence is scarce, archaeological finds of simple lyres and flutes suggest that music played a role. You might hear the soft, resonant strumming of a lyre, or the haunting melody of a bone flute, adding a layer of atmosphere to the longhouse evenings. Historians still argue whether singing was more common than instrumental music, or if both were equally integrated into their social life. Beyond these organized activities, there was the simple pleasure of communal relaxation. After a long day of farming, crafting, or fishing, gathering by the fire, sharing a meal, and simply conversing would have been a cherished leisure activity. Imagine the warmth of the fire on your face, the contented murmur of voices, the sense of belonging within your community. It was a time to unwind, to share news, and to strengthen the bonds that held their society together. Even the most mundane activities, like carving wood or mending tools, could be imbued with a sense of quiet satisfaction, transforming them into a form of meditative leisure. The Vikings understood that true rest wasn't just about idleness, but about engaging in activities that refreshed the mind and body, preparing them for the challenges of another day. As the echoes of Viking games and laughter gently fade, we arrive at the final quiet moments of our journey, seeking to gently reinforce a crucial understanding, beyond the stereotype. For too long, the image of the Viking has been dominated by the axe-wielding raider, the fearsome warrior striking terror into the hearts of monks and villagers. While this was undeniably a part of their history, it was far from the whole story. Tonight, you've glimpsed the true, multifaceted nature of Viking life, a richness that goes far beyond the plunder. You've experienced the comforting warmth of the longhouse, the heart of their communal existence, where families lived, worked, and shared their lives in close quarters. You felt the quiet satisfaction of farming the land, understanding that their very survival depended on the rhythm of the seasons, the fertility of the soil, and the health of their livestock. This was a life of hard work, yes, but also one deeply connected to the natural world around them. You've heard the rhythmic sounds of crafting, from the blacksmith's hammer to the weaver's loom, realizing that the Vikings were not just consumers of wealth, but skilled creators. Their ingenuity and self-sufficiency were paramount, turning raw materials into everything they needed to thrive. You've glimpsed the intricate tapestry of family and community, understanding the vital roles played by every member, the strength derived from their interdependence, and the wisdom passed down through generations. Remember the simple joy of a feast by the flickering firelight, the shared stories, and the potent ale that eased the day's toil. These were moments of human connection, of celebration, reinforcing the bonds that held their society together. And the quiet power of the Thing, their unique system of law and order, showed a society that valued consensus and compensation over endless vendetta, a testament to their pragmatic approach to justice. You felt the pervasive influence of their spiritual beliefs, not as a rigid dogma, but as an intimate connection to the gods, spirits, and the concept of fate that shaped their daily decisions and gave meaning to their existence. And the enduring power of the saga, passed down by word of mouth, reminds us that they were a people who revered their history, their heroes, and the art of storytelling itself. Consider the vast networks of trade that connected them to distant lands, bringing exotic goods and ideas back to Scandinavia, showcasing a people who were shrewd merchants and intrepid explorers, not just conquerors. And finally, the practical yet dignified aspects of their clothing, their rudimentary but often effective healing practices, and the hands-on nature of their education all paint a picture of a resilient, adaptable, and fundamentally human society. The Viking Age was a period of dynamic change, innovation, and movement, but it was also a time of quiet domesticity, sustained labor, and deep cultural roots. These were people who tilled the soil, raised families, built homes, and sought moments of joy and connection. Just like us, their daily lives, far from being boring, offer a profound insight into human resilience and ingenuity in the face of challenging circumstances. So, as you drift deeper now, take with you the understanding that the Viking story is much richer and far more peaceful than you might have ever imagined. Sweet dreams.